Welcome to Uncorked Canvas. My name is Rebecca.
And I'm Danessa.
And we're going to teach you how to paint the Highland cow today.
Moo.
I'm going to go over the supplies that we have laid out in front of us. We've got our canvases pre-stenciled just in front of us, easy to get to, and then I have over here my paper towels and my paint brushes, and then I've got my water cup full of paint water, and then I have my colors already put out on the palette in front of me. You can always be dipping into your container of paints, but be careful that you always use a clean brush to do. All right, so what we're gonna do is start with the background. We're gonna paint the sky and the grass, and we're all gonna do that in one go, all over our entire canvas, except for kind of avoiding the cow. But we don't have to avoid the lines very much because we're gonna be painting on top of it later on. So we're just gonna kind of paint as much as we can, and don't try to be tidy around your stencil. You'll still be able to see it underneath the paint. So first things first, you're gonna go ahead and grab your largest brush, and you're gonna go ahead and get that wet first. And then you're gonna dab off any extra water on your paper towel. You still want it to be damp, you just don't want it dripping wet. And then what you're gonna do is scoop up some white, start painting on your background, and then kind of once you've emptied out your brush, go ahead and get a little bit more water on your brush and water down the paint on your canvas. And go ahead and go over your stencil lines. We don't want any dry spots here because we're going to be painting wet into wet. So we want to make sure that this stays damp as long as possible. So I'm going to scoop up more water, get little bits of paint, and just kind of cover it in just really damp white. Or everyone's favorite word, moist.
Moist.
Moist white.
Moistness of white.
Yes, yes. And get it as covered as you can, but also keep in mind that you really want quite a bit of water in this. So it's more important even than the paint that it be nice and wet. Okay, so just make sure you kind of revisit all these little areas and make sure there's no little dry patches, wet everything back down. And then what we're gonna do, you can start either on the grass or in the sky, but what you wanna go over to is your blue. Grab a tiny bit on your brush, just kind of get the edges kind of coated on here. Make sure your brush is still damp. And then you can start wherever you want in the sky. The whole point of this is that it's going to pick up the white and blend out right away and just create that kind of misty, faded out sky. And you can kind of keep building up little bits of your blue to just however dark you want your sky to be. But we want to let it blend out, especially towards those edges. So just kind of keep pushing it out. I'm gonna go kind of about 2/3 of the way down, more or less, with sky before I go into the grass. And I'm gonna leave a good amount of it as white as I can, but if you want some darker sky, you can kind of even dab it in there and that'll create more of a cloudy look. So it's up to you to kind of experiment. Less is more with this though. It's really easy to add too much paint, but it's much easier if you slowly add little bits of your blue. So try to be a little bit tentative to begin with, and you can definitely build it up. But quickly go into your green before the bottom part dries. You can always, of course, reapply the white if it's really dried out, but try to clean your brush before you do that. So mix up long brush strokes and short, up to you. However, like cloudy you want it to look. And you can see I'm definitely not being careful of my lines. We're gonna paint on top of it, so it is okay. It's gonna be really pale and easy to paint on top of. So into the same kind of blue and white mixture that I have right here, you can put a little bit more blue, but then your yellow is gonna make a green. So go ahead and add, in order of proportions, your yellow to your blue. And then if you feel like your brush is really loaded up with paint to start out with, just wipe it off on your paper towel. And then slowly start adding it to the bottom third.
I went darker.
You did. You went blue. It's pretty. There's really no wrong way to do this. If it just doesn't look as blended out, it's just not as out of focus. It's kind of what we're doing here is trying to add just kind of a muted background so the cow feels like it's just a little bit more focused in the background. But if you add a lot of details or do darker colors, it'll just feel like the background just is not blurred out. That is all. That's the only difference.
Hey,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Trying to paint here.
Don't bump your partner. They get defensive.
or do.
All right, so I've kind of smoothed it out. Stop before you're ready. Like really, you just gotta stop.
Don't
Stop.
do it.
And if you have like more bouncy curved brush strokes, it just means maybe there's hills back there. If you have straight, he's on the plains out there. He or she, it. When you're done with this brush, go ahead and just kind of wipe off extra paint on your paper towel. And then we're gonna go ahead and clean it out for our next step. So you just gently flex it at the bottom of your cup. Just kind of gently jab it down there. Be kind to your brush. And then if the water comes out clear on your paper towel, you've got a clean brush. We're actually gonna send you on a little bit of a dry break first though, because it's a lot easier to paint the first layer to your cow if you're not having to contend with your wet paint in the background. So clean that brush out, but then also let's go ahead and let it dry for the most part. And we'll be back in a second with a dry canvas. All right, so we're back with a dry canvas. Just make sure that it is not completely wet. It's okay if it's a little bit tacky in the background. You can move on to the next step here. We're gonna do the first layer to the cow, the fur area, and then after that, while that's drying, we'll do the horns. But we're gonna cover this entire thing with brown to just kind of get the first layer. It's gonna look kind of like a pile of turd after that, right?
No, it looks like a bear. And then
it does look like a bear.
Like
I see poo,
a
you
Bob
see
Ross
bear. So we're just gonna get this first layer. It's just gonna be the exact color of poop, but that's exactly the color that we want. We're gonna get a mixture of pretty much half of your golden brown and half of your darker brown. So if they're sitting next to each other on the palette, just kind of pull them each into a little pile right here, or scoop them up and make sure you're mixing them in a little batch over here. And it's about half and half. It doesn't have to be precise. We're just looking for that kind of golden color here. And it doesn't really matter how you put it on. We just are looking for coverage, and you do want to go above your nose, completely cover it up, but you can see this paint is semi-transparent, so we're gonna rely on that. We're just gonna go over everything. You can even go on top of your lines, even over them a little bit, because when we come back to do the next layers, the highlights, everything like that, we're gonna take some hair over those sections anyway, so you don't have to worry about staying super precise inside your lines. Now up to the ears, you can see, you wanna go in on that shape first and then kind of round it out to meet the top more or less. And then it's sometimes me just saying, be messy. You're like, but I can't. It's okay to not be able to be as messy as I am. But I'm gonna go over my leaf lines here because I don't really feel like being precise. Today's just not a precise day. But anyone who knew me as a child, apparently,
any day, though?
no, definitely not. Anyone who knew me as a child, apparently, and I still struggle with this, I don't color inside lines very well. My coloring books, I was just never really good at staying inside the lines. So
well, I guess I'm not gonna have a coloring book party with you.
yeah, no. I'll just paint over your coloring books. All right.
So you went all the way up to
yeah,
top
so kind of
horn.
just yeah. And it'll disappear behind the leaves. It's not super important that it follows a specific shape. Just kind of auto continue that line. Get it covered. And then if you want to just be cautious about dragging your sleeve through your cow and not getting any of this brown in,
I would never.
you can. I know you would never. You're very good. You're very good. You can wait for this to be dry, but we'll dive right into doing the horns.
Oh, we will
But leave this as it is. Don't try to fix it yet. This is just the foundation color. This is the first layer. We're gonna have shadows and then highlights on top of this, but this is gonna be the foundation color.
I think it looks done.
I'm good with it if you're good with it.
You know, I'm slower at getting these nooks and crannies than you are.
Well, because I didn't stay in the lines.
Because you didn't stay in the lines, that's right.
It's cheating. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and paint the horns next, and then we're gonna transition while that's drying. Everything is drying, we'll transition into doing the first layer of our leaves.
Oh.
So we're gonna grab our medium-sized brush and use this now to paint our horns. Make sure your big one is completely cleaned out, run it under the sink water, or leave it in your water cup so it doesn't dry out so you can use it again in the future. Okay, so get your medium-sized brush wet first to wipe off any drips on your paper towel. Towel. All right, so I'm gonna grab my medium-sized brush to do the horns next. So you wanna get it wet first and then wipe off any drips, of course, on your paper towel. And then we're gonna mix a pale gray. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna scoop up, you don't need a ton of this color, just enough for those little horns over here. So I'm just gonna scoop up a little pile of my white and separate it out. I'm gonna go over to my my black. I'm just gonna pull in a tiny bit. We don't want this very dark. We just want it to be slightly gray. I'm gonna stir small so my color doesn't dry out very quickly. This is gonna be the pale top part of the horns, and then I will darken it for the shadows underneath. And then what you can do is you can grab either of your browns, either your brown or your gold. I'm gonna grab a little bit of the gold, and I'm just gonna stir this in so that it's not just pure gray, it's got a little bit of that warmth, kind of natural warmth that their horns would have in it rather than just black and white. It's gonna have a little bit of the gold like the rest of their fur.
Have you met one?
I have.
I
I'm sure someday.
How you knew they had warm
They have warm horns. That's the first thing you do when you see horns. You just go grab them.
like right, ooh,
You know?
real warm.
You know? You just go grab them by the horn. Okay, anyway. All right, so what you're gonna do is you're gonna start by painting the top half of the horn in this pale color. So of course that means it's gonna start out narrower and it's going to thicken. You just kind of wanna go the whole distance of half of it being pale. And you'll pretty much wanna go on top of your lines here. If you go too far like I do, because again, I'm really bad at staying in the lines. I'll just take my finger and kind of smudge it out. Depending on your background and how light or dark that is, if you feel like you need to brighten your horns, you can pick up some pure white and kind of paint that in. It's up to you and what you feel like is right for your painting. The color of the horns is not like a distinctive design of these cows that needs to be exactly so.
Yes, it is.
Oh my God. So then what we'll do is I'll just take a little bit of black. I'm gonna take a little corner of this, darken it, maybe add a little bit more of that gold or brown, up to you. And I'm just gonna have a dark gray for the bottom half. Now what you wanna do is put another stripe here, now filling up the bottom. Make sure it's got some water in it so that it spreads easily. That definitely will help. And turn your brush on its side to get narrow brush strokes. You also do have your smallest brush if you find that a little bit harder to use. I'm gonna wipe off all the extra paint, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna paint half into both of those colors. And I'm just gonna keep going half in, and just kind of keep painting long brush strokes along the length of the horn. And eventually, only if they're still wet though, as I kind of go up and down into both of those areas, it's gonna start blending out and create something like a blend between those two, but don't worry about it being super smooth. It doesn't have to be super smooth because there's a little bit of texture in the horns, so they don't have to be
Warm horns.
perfect. The warm horns that you grab as soon as you see them. For me, now that you can see it against the background, it's a little bit hard to see the top of the horn. So if you feel like you need to darken it to make the contrast right, it doesn't have to be white on the top, but if you feel like it needs to be lighter, it's up to you. So I'm just gonna darken mine just a tiny bit on top. Totally just up to you what you feel like is right. All right, and then I'm just gonna repeat that on the other side. While the horns are drying, we're gonna go ahead and do the first layer to the greenery. Keeping in mind, we don't need to do all of the little individual leaves or anything that's extraneous around the outside. We're not gonna do any flowers. We're just doing, it's kind of like this, we're just doing the base color. So it's gonna be a little bit messy, but we just want it to be green back there for when we do the flowers on top. Okay, so this is gonna be similar to how we mixed the green from before, except it's not gonna be mixing into white, so it'll stay darker this time. You can mix kind of whatever shade of green that you want, lighter or darker, but I'm gonna go with about half yellow and half blue. And then I'm gonna go to the edge of my pile of white and pull in just a little bit of white. And once you add the white, you can also just kind of tell what shade you're working with. So if this isn't quite what you're looking for, you can add more or less yellow. Up to you what kind of green you're looking for. And if you want it to get a little bit mossier and maybe a little bit earthier of a green, grab some of your brown and mix that in. What you're gonna do now is just start inside those shapes. You can loosely go in here. These don't have to be exactly these leaf shapes that come down in the crown. And you can totally change the shape as well. Just make sure you go over those lines so they don't come through later. I'm just gonna loosely fill those in. We've still got leaves and flowers going on top, so this will just be a nice beginning to that.
Foliage.
Okay, and then we want to create something of a dome. It's up to you how big you want this to be. We've still got the flowers that are going to go kind of on top and in front, as well as some leaves that'll go around it. But I want to go on top of the ears. So I'm just going to kind of outline on top wherever those meet the horns. And then I'm just going to create this kind of loose, bouncy dome on top of the head. And you can make it bumpy and just really as big as you want. I wouldn't recommend going to like the top of the canvas, but if you know what, if that brings you joy, you do it. It's all about you and your cow.
Joy.
Joy. If it brings a joy. Okay, and then I went through and I kind of did swirling over the top to feather the paint so it's not an exact shape. And if you guys are feeling super fancy, what you could do, wait. You got a little extra white, a little extra white, a little extra yellow. See that? And then you do a lighter color and you can just kind of paint that in as well. So you don't have to be precise or even consistent with your colors, and they'll just add more texture and detail later. So I like to just make it a little bit lighter towards the top. Kind of cut that through. A lot of this will get covered up with flowers though, so don't feel like you have to get very fancy. Okay, so this we really just want dry now, so we're gonna go ahead and just give you guys another dry break. Don't forget to pause the video if you ever just need to catch up, and of course rewind it whenever you need to. But we're just gonna make sure that everything is dry, because when we go in to do our shadows and everything into the cow, we don't want to drag any of the green or anything like that into it. So let's go ahead and just do a quick safety dry break. All right, so we're gonna go ahead now with our dry canvas. We're gonna be painting now the shadows, the first layer of the fur on the cow. So before it's kind of a base color, now we're actually gonna pay attention to our our brush strokes so they look more like fur, and we're gonna be more intentional with how we apply the paint. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and grab a little bit of my black, get it near my dark brown, and about half and half. It's gonna get you to like a 70% cocoa kind of thing. Dark brown. And if you want your cow to be a darker shade, just go with even closer to pure black. And what we're gonna do is be a little bit intentional with the placement for around the nose. So I like to just kind of start with those areas first. I'm gonna trace around the whole nose, mouth area.
On the outside?
On the outside, yeah. Or like me, also on the inside. And try to get that color really backed up into that shape. We will have another layer on our nose, so it's okay if you get a little outside the lines. We can always bring it back just a little bit more if we need to. So we've got that kind of outlined, but then what we want to do is brush kind of up just a little bit. So I'm just going to kind of start in those dark areas, brush upwards, and then more importantly, I'm going to give him a goatee. I know it's a cow, but we're gonna give him a goatee.
Whoa.
All right, and then we're gonna brush just downwards. You can go pretty far with this because we're gonna bring our lighter colors up into it. So we really want there to be some nice, rich shadows that are gonna come through the hair that we add later. This is a really aggressive beard.
Yeah, seems
a little.
This is real
This
crazy
is
goatee.
mid-quarantine, and then we're gonna bring it back to, oh, we have to go back to the office beard. All right, and then I'm gonna go up into the ears, and I'm gonna first kind of go in and just try to outline and get it a little bit cleaned up along those edges. And then I'll start going underneath a little bit of the leaves. You don't have to trace out all of them, but you can go in with some shadows under as many as you want with this dark. And on camera, this might look like pure black, but there is some brown mixed in with it. Okay, and then I'm gonna turn my brush on its side, and I'm gonna start brushing some dark shadows. It is okay if this feels a little aggressive to begin with. It's gonna be a high contrast. What we're gonna do with the next layer is bring it in the medium shade, so that, and the highlights and everything like that, so it'll bring back a lot of it. Won't feel so high of contrast once we have the other colors on top. So we're just going with our darkest now and going into all of our ears here, getting this all filled in. You can go underneath all of your leaves if you need to, but mostly the ears are gonna go pretty much almost completely dark. Then these were really the more intentional spots that we wanted to get our dark color in here. I will try now to get some direction with the fur. I'm gonna go upwards now and my brush turn on its side, so that now when I'm just kind of randomly adding the dark places now, because we're not trying to trace out any shape now, we're just gonna kind of bring in some random shadows. I still want it to come through later looking like fur, so I still want my brush strokes to start now being up and down, and even just not even straight up and down, but kind of curving just a little bit. It doesn't need to be straight the whole time. And I'm just gonna try to get this kind of dispersed. Some of this won't come through in the end, but we do want some darker patches to come through our highlights later on, so I'm just gonna get this randomly put throughout. I like to also take some shadow down to the bottom off the edge of the canvas, and that'll give it a nice detail later on. So let's just make a little bit of a mess. This is weird looking now. It's weird looking. Don't worry. Don't worry. It'll come together.
Do I trust this?
This process?
Yes. One with the canvas. Okay, now I get to just make a mess.
Pretty much. And again, you're kind of wanting to go around these inside parts here. Still follow generally the shape. You're not just wanting to go straight up and down with your brush strokes. That's not going to look natural. We really want it to look like it still curves around these shapes, as if the hair is going to flow with that. It's going to be more important with our next layer, because that's really where you're going to see a lot of the hair textures, their highlights. But let's start now with these shadows, so that when they peek through, we've got some good details. All right, so our next layer, while the shadows are drying right here, just try to ignore this hot mess down here. Let's go ahead and put some happy flowers. Now, as with everything on here, it starts with a foundational color, and then we put the details on top. So this is just going to be swirls of color, up to you what colors that you want. I'm gonna go with the original one, which is kind of a nice warm pink, and also yellow. You guys can change any of these colors and do whatever you want. When we had a class in the studio doing this, everyone did completely different colors, and they all looked so happy. You could just do white flowers. It's just really pretty, really pretty. Yeah. So just go with whatever colors make you happy. Of course, the colors that you can mix, you've got literally all of the primaries right here. So primaries are what make up every single other color. So with your blue and red, you can make purple. With your, we've already figured out, with your blue and yellow, you make green. You can make some pretty bright green flowers, and that would look lovely. And with yellow and red, you can make orange, and then just have fun. Make sure you just put some white in those colors, and they'll sit on top, and you can just start experimenting and having fun with all of your colors. But I'm gonna go ahead and show you how to mix the ones that are in the original one. We'll start with the simple one, which is going to be the yellow, a little bit of white, a little bit of yellow, just to wherever you like your balance with these. I like my yellows to be a little bit more gold. So what I do is I take a little tiny touch of red, and that mixed in, it doesn't make it orange if you add just a tiny bit, it just turns it into a golden yellow. And those are the yellows that I prefer on mine. So you could even have multiple shades for the same thing if you made another pile of more yellow, or even taking it and making it orange. You could have multiple shades of flowers just like that. So completely up to your taste. This is your cow. Coo, this is your coo.
My coo.
All right, so next we're gonna do 2 colors on the crown, so I'm not looking to fill the whole thing up with this first layer. So what I'm gonna do is just get little bouncy shapes on top of the crown. Try to put your paint on kind of thick so we don't have to do 2 layers of this.
You're bossy.
I am so bossy. So we want to do just a few on here, leaving room for my pink ones later, but you can always paint pink on top or your other color on top if you decide to replace one. And try not to get them all exactly in the shape. Try to have some overlap on the background and things like that. They shouldn't all just stay in the green. And then just varying sizes. It's a good idea. You can even do little dots, little shapes here and there. I'm gonna go, before I add too many yellow, I'm gonna go ahead and mix some pink. This can be whatever shade of pink you like. I like to add a little bit of yellow. You can see I mixed it kind of in with my previous color. A little bit of yellow in with the red and some white to make it pink. You can do whatever shade you want. Even just red flowers look pretty. Same exact thing. Let's go ahead and just start adding swirls. And you can have some of them overlap with the yellow. They can overlap each other, and that creates a really nice sense of depth. Like they really piled on that head. Okay, so for our next layer, let's go ahead and just leave our shadows dry for another second down below. So we're gonna go ahead and do the little leaves and vines that now peek out behind our flowers. So let's go ahead with, you can either do your medium-sized brush or your smallest one, whatever you feel more comfortable with. I'm gonna go ahead with my smallest one to get the small details of those vines. And then I might switch to my medium-sized brush to get the leaves. It's up to you, whatever you want to do. Whatever makes you feel like you have a little bit more control over the shapes. I'm going to stir a darker green now. I'm not going to add any white to it. So again, that's about half blue and half yellow. And now I'm going to stir, because these paints are pretty thick all on their own. So I'm going to stir a little bit of water into that mixture to just make it a little bit more liquidy and easier to flow with. And then what you want to do to get your brush down to its small size is spin out all the extra paint, and that'll get it back to its narrow size. Make sure you don't drag your hand through any of the shadows while we do these. And add individual leaves just kind of peeking out over the back here, just little details that you want just to finish off that the shape of the crown, but more importantly are these little vines that you can have coming out kind of wherever you want. And don't be afraid to come out over and out of the shape. I'm gonna do the vines first, and then you can do the little leaves. So what I do, I usually use the medium-sized brush for this, but for the narrow one, you can either trace the whole shape and then fill it in, or you can start with a little bit of pressure, increase the pressure, and then lift the pressure. You might want to practice on the paper we sent you, just to kind of get the feel for that brush. But you start with a little bit of pressure, increase, then lift, and you've got yourself a leaf shape. A little bit of pressure, increase for the center, then lift as it matches and meets up with the actual vine itself. And you can do the reverse as well. And you can see you get that little leaf shape. So practice on the paper and you'll get a little more consistent. And if you feel like, depending on what color your everything else is for like the first layer of greens and everything. You can darken these colors if you feel like it's not popping out as much as you want. You can darken it by adding a little bit of black, and it'll sit on top just a little bit better. And then I will also be adding the little bits of vines that kind of peek down underneath the horns and down below. So make sure you add those little details. They're very nice to make it feel like the crown is super big.
Cool. Gotta have the biggest
crown possible.
Biggest crown.
So you can add just little bits of leaves popping out. I just like to grow the shape just a little bit by doing just little pieces, and you can even go in between. You can go in between the flowers and add little details like that. I just like to do little dashes of darker green. Just makes it look a little bit more interesting. And once we add the details of the actual flowers themselves, it will also change the entire picture. All right, so we finished off the first layer to our flowers as well as the vines around it. So we're gonna let those dry now, and we're gonna go ahead and move back down onto the cow's nose first. That'll be nice to get that detail finished up. And then we can go in and do the highlights to the fur, which is where it's all gonna start coming together. So go ahead and get your medium-sized brush cleaned out. We don't want any green or any other colors that you had on there. We're gonna go ahead and mix now the nose color. It's going to be somewhat transparent. That's why we put the brown on the underneath side. So it will have some of that showing through. We're counting on it. So what we're gonna be doing is mixing first a little bit of white and a little bit of black, maybe half and half. It kind of depends on how light you want the nose to be. And then grab a little bit of your darker brown, stir that in, again to the shade that you like. I'm gonna lighten mine just a teensy bit. And honestly, when I've seen people painting it, you definitely want to add more brown than you think. So maybe 2 parts brown to 1 part white and black or something like that. That almost made it more complicated than it needs to be, probably. All right, I'm gonna add a little bit of water to this paint to make sure it goes on fluidly because I still want it to be transparent. And then I'm gonna go ahead and fill that nose in. And you can see through, you might not be able to see it on the camera, but I can see through to the underpainting. It's showing through, and that makes it all look like it. Makes it look all like it's blending into the rest of the cow exactly how we want. Yeah. When you're stirring colors, a lot of times you'll get the paintbrush really loaded up with paint. So sometimes after you're done stirring a color, it's a good idea to actually clean out your brush completely before you go pick it up. That way you have a little bit more control of how much gets delivered to your canvas.
Better.
Yeah, there you go. You got it.
And
that's one of the struggles with mixing with the same brush you're applying with. So it's a good like reset button. Even while this is wet, let's go ahead and do the little details to finish off the nose. I'm gonna grab my smallest brush, get all of that green out of there, for sure get it all out. Okay. And then what I do is I go ahead and just get the rest of the drips off the ferrule of the brush. I'm just gonna squeeze this out, make sure there's no drips, because we really don't want any drips falling into the wet paint or it'll create a little puddle here that will not look super cute. All right, and then I'm just gonna drag a little tiny bit of black on this brush. I'm gonna do the same thing where I wanna spin it back to its original shape so I have all the control. And here I'm gonna grab the brush by the end so I can really draw with it like you would any sort of pen. So I'm gonna try to get as much control as I can. I'm gonna start in the corner of the nose. I'm gonna go in a slight distance, and I'm gonna start with the narrow, and then I'm gonna increase the pressure as I go in to create the kind of the nostril flare in the center.
This is just pure black.
Pure black. And it might mix in with your first color, which is exactly what we want. We kind of want it to get a little bit muted, but if it goes on just pure black, that's okay too. You can do the opposite where you start with the most pressure and then lift towards that corner. And then if you feel like you didn't get enough pressure to begin with, go ahead and kind of round out kind of the teardrop shape. very long teardrop.
The longest too. He's real sad.
It's going
about
down your
his
cheek.
eyes.
Okay, and then from these corners right here, these little corners on the side, this is where we're gonna create that little line for the mouth. You're gonna slightly curve upwards and then downwards, and you wanna have them almost touch in the center, like so. I think they barely touch, but it's definitely more pressure towards the outside, less pressure as they go inwards.
That's at the bottom of this.
Yeah, and if you stare too long at this shape, don't stare this long at this shape, because it starts to look like some sort of shape like that in Mario.
Mario?
The little, I don't know, this reminds me of one of those little creatures that Mario has to stomp on, this little shape. So don't stare too long at the nose. Maybe let's ignore this now.
Just erase the nose from your
peripheral. So let's go ahead and add the fur, and once the fur comes around it, while he does not have this dark circle around it, it'll look much better. Okay, so let's get back to our medium-sized brush. Clean that out pretty thoroughly. And then again, I like to squeeze the little ferrule, the little drops that stay on that ferrule, and make sure it's all cleaned up. So for this, the colors, you're gonna want more than one shade. It's going to be a lot more of your gold this time. I'm gonna go in with pure gold, but then most of my color is going to be gold with white. So you can go ahead and scoop up some white, put it near the gold, and stir that in. And even then, don't even be super particular about how much you stir it. We really want a lot of variation in this color. I'll start with pretty much pure gold, and then I'm gonna start building on top that brighter color. And it's really about building up layers. The only place that we really care the direction of the fur, kind of like with those shadows, we really care about the direction that it goes, is especially above the snout, the nose. So when I come down here, I don't want necessarily the fur again. Be cautious about just dragging your brush down the whole time. That's not following the contour of the shape of the cow that's underneath all this fur. Just like your hair, when you have your hair flowing over your head, it forms around your head. It's not just straight down. So we really want to be cautious of making sure that we follow these contours of the cow, and that's what really gives it that realism. If you want it to look like he took a flat iron to his hair and this is totally emo,
or you're that girl that crawls out of the TV.
Yeah, exactly, where it's just falling in front. That's, if you want it to be super straight, that's totally fine. It'll just look a little bit less natural, and it won't look bad, it'll just look different. So if you're looking to match the original one, you really want it to look like that, you'll want to follow the curve of the face. I'm gonna start around the snout because that's where the hair really does actually curve the most. So I'm gonna start by curving around the face, and then when I come down to the snout, I've got my brush on its side, I lift up for the contour of that hair, but also where it lifts up and changes direction and fades. So we come down to the top of the snout. I'm leaving that shadow here, and honestly, this first brush stroke is gonna look the roughest. Don't worry. We'll just keep building up those layers. At top of the nose, you can see I'm starting to I'm leaving a lot of the shadow showing. I'm gonna pick up either my gold or my white and gold, and I'm gonna try to kind of curve around that shape. And just know that the first layers are gonna look a little rough. It's all about building now these highlights. We've got all of our darkest colors, but now we really wanna start layering on top and building up those shapes and that pattern of hair. So I'm just gonna start mixing into this. If you want to even introduce some gold and your brown, you can make a whole mess on your palette, and it will all blend together. The more you paint it, the more it'll blend, and the more just details you're gonna get just by having a change in colors. So I'm gonna start dragging on top. And I don't wanna say cover up all of my shadows, so I'm gonna kind of paint around those, but the way that they ended was a little bit harsh, so I'm gonna still paint up into them. Like, I'll turn my brush and I'll paint on top, but then I'll kind of skip over and paint up into them. So it is about incorporating them, not covering them up. So again, I'll just go back to kind of finishing up the top of the mouth. Now you can see, if you get close to your painting, you'll see the little line of color change behind these colors. These are transparent. So that doesn't mean try to put your paint on super, super thick necessarily the first time. It does mean you can come back and revisit these so you don't see the dark shadow of underneath. So I'm just gonna keep layering on top and then leave a section alone and come back to it and do another layer on top of that. And that's what's really gonna build up what makes it look like really thick, bushy hair. And that's really what these cows really just look like. All right, and then when I come down underneath the chin area, I'm gonna brush up into that shadow. And try to lift my brush stroke. And you can see you can be really aggressive with your brush stroke. You're just like, actually just lift it. Lift it off your canvas and that will give it that look. Now it's all really about just going back into these areas, brushing up into the ears, not covering up your shadows, but incorporating them. And then when I get to the edges, I'm not trying to stay in the shape too concisely. I'm gonna try to, in some areas, have the paint go off the edge. And that's what really makes it feel more fluffy. So don't feel too constrained by your stencil lines. It's more furry if you don't stay in them. All right, we'll probably fast track this next step. It's so you guys can really see how it's gonna come together a little bit faster, because these first steps are a little bit rough to watch. And know, of course, that you can go back into your darker colors and build them up. That really does add a lot more depth if you also kind of revisit some of your first colors. But we're just gonna go ahead and fast track this so you guys can see that even starting out like this, it'll build. So we're gonna go ahead and speed it up for you guys so you can really see it all come together. All right, so now that we are done with the fur texture on top of the cow, we're gonna let this dry. Our canvas is dry though, and you wanna make sure that yours is dry before you do any finishing touches on there. Touch it to make sure. But while this is drying, or as your final touch, we're gonna go ahead and finish the details on our flowers. And this is gonna be adding the actual petal texture, as well as I like including little bits of like baby's breath and little bits of white dots in there to really brighten it up, but also add little tiny details. And I feel like that adds a huge finishing touch. I don't know why, but it really does. So let's go ahead and finish that off, and that will finalize the details. And so then you can decide if you want to change anything on your painting or add anything. So let's go ahead and finish those guys up. I'm gonna get my smallest brush though for this detail. Cleaned it all out nice and thoroughly. And then I'm gonna go ahead and just mix a brighter shade of both of these colors. I'll start with the yellow one more time with some white, and then you only want to pull in a teensy tiny bit of your yellow. You want it to be just off of white here. And it does depend on though how pale your yellow was to begin with. So if you ended up with a really, really pale yellow, like Dinesh is really pale, you might want to go in with just pure white. So it is up to you to judge. So what we're going to do is we're going to start in the center of the flower. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to start in the center of the flower, and we're going to be doing these overlapping C kind of shapes that spiral around each other until they create kind of this flower pattern, almost like a rose. So I'll start in the center, and the center doesn't necessarily mean that it's at the very center of the shape. It means the center of the flower could be facing upwards. So you can start up above, and you just want to have these patterns that circle each other, just short kind of C shapes here.
Oh, yeah, you can't see mine at all.
And just keeping it very, very simple. Only a few brush strokes are going to give that look. Up close, you'll see every single individual brush stroke and be like, I don't know if that looks like a flower. Back away from it, look at it from a distance, and you'll see it does not take much to make it just really look like a really nice, just delicate flower. For these little pieces, I'm not even gonna try to do that much spiraling. I'm just gonna do little bits of highlighting in there, just little dots almost in the center.
I'm brightening my yellows because even with the white, you can't see. And then I'll do my pink.
Yeah, so
first.
This is the perfect time. Change your colors first before you add all the details on top. It's a good time to do it. I'm gonna go into my pink, and I'm gonna just create a pale pink, and I'll do it on top of here because I still want some of that yellow mixing in, so I'll just kind of mix it on top of this. And worst case, you try it on your colors and you find out it's not bright enough, you can change your color at any time. You just want it to be a few shades lighter than your first layer. I'm gonna start again in the center, and even on the pink, you can see it a little bit better. I'm just gonna start spiraling. And when I go to their edge, I'm also gonna kind of increase the pressure on this brush so that it does make the petals feel like they get a little bit bigger. And don't spend too much time on this. Be quick with your little brush strokes, and that will make it feel a little bit more organic too. You don't wanna make them too perfectly circled or too perfect like a C shape. Try to be loose about it, and that helps. Now, my favorite touch is getting this brush totally cleaned out, getting some pure white just on the tip that bristles, just kind of scoop up a good amount, and then just start creating little clumpings of white flowers. And don't worry about trying to stay on top of the green. The little bit of baby's breath is always kind of fans out, so it can really go outside of your crown here. And I just start to kind of fill in any of the gaps where I just want to brighten it up a little bit. I just start doing little clumpings of white dots. And you can even do it in front of your other flowers. So I do that, and then if you really want to, if you feel like everything is too constrained inside your shape, take just a bright color similar to what you had from before, and what you can do is you can create little smudges of bright color outside the crown. I'm just kind of pressing the whole length of that brush down, and I can just kind of keep growing that crown without feeling like I have to paint an actual flower. So that's a good way to grow it if you want to grow it kind of outside the shape. If you like it kind of a little bit tighter, just leave everything on top of the green. If you really want to make it feel like it's a little bit more flowing, add little bits that break away from that green pattern. And that's going to be kind of the last touches to your crown. Thank you so much for painting with us today. I hope you had a lot of fun, and we can't wait to paint with you next time. Bye-bye now.
Bye.